Spell speed 4 is a fan term for card effects that don't allow other cards to be responded to them. So in this video, we'll be going over 10 of the worst cards that have an effect similar to this. And at number 10, we have Spiritualism. This is a normal spell card which simply has the effect where you can return one of your opponent's spell or trap cards to their hand. And it goes on to have the additional effect where this card's activation and effect cannot be negated. Now, this one isn't spell speed 4 like most of the other cards in this list, since your opponent can respond to it, they just can't respond to this card. So it kind of counts for this list, but it's not a true spell speed 4 effect like Super Polymerization or XYZ Encore. Now, despite Spiritualism's low power level, it is technically a useful effect. If you want to start your combo plays and your opponent only has a lone face-down spell or trap card, this can allow you to very easily return that card to their hand so they can't disrupt your plays. Although, they can activate the card in response to this effect, like if they have a face-down Raigeki break for example, or if they don't activate the card, they can just use it again their next turn, since it doesn't actually destroy it. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, this card is a pretty popular option for free-to-play decks, because it's one of the few spell and trap card removals that is available to free-to-play players, and works every time, unlike something like Dice Foon, which is another free-to-play potential spell or trap card removal. It's not a great spell or trap card removal, but seeing as Duel Links only has 3 spell and trap card zones, there is a chance you'll be able to remove the only card your opponent might have that stops your plays, or to get rid of a battle trap so you can enter the battle phase and then win that turn. So the fact that it doesn't destroy the card doesn't matter very much in those situations where you're going to win that turn anyway. And at number 9, we have Nordic relic Laevateinn. This is a trap card which can only be activated when a monster destroys another monster by battle. You can then target one of those monsters and destroy it. And also, cards and effects cannot be activated in response to this card's activation, which means your opponent can't try to stop the destruction with some form of negation. So it's actually a pretty effective way to destroy a monster through a field of negations. The problem with the card, though, is entirely in its activation requirement. It only works on a monster who destroys another card by battle during the turn. Which means, best case scenario, you set this card during your turn, wait for one of your opponent's monsters that you want to destroy with this card to destroy one of your monsters, then you can activate this card afterwards. So it doesn't allow you to destroy things in order to save your cards, it's only retaliatory in nature, which generally doesn't help advance the game state very much. So it's a neat effect, but it's a little bit too cumbersome to use for any kind of actual competitive play. And at number 8, we have Fairy Knight Ingunar. This is a rank 6 Xyz monster that requires 3 level 6 monsters for its materials, and then has the effect where, once per turn, you can detach 2 of its materials in order to return all other cards on the field to the hand. And also, your opponent cannot activate any cards or effects in response to this effect. So if you're able to bring out Fairy Knight Ingunar, and your opponent doesn't negate its effects before it's able to activate its detach 2 effect, then it's basically a guaranteed board wipe. So the effect is actually really good, and the spell speed 4 nature of it makes it even better. So, here's the problem with the card. It's too hard to bring out. Xyz monsters that require more than 2 materials generally don't see play, unless they have an alternative way to bring the card out to rank it up on top of another card that only requires 2 materials. And usually the cards that require more than 2 Xyz materials that do see play, saw play because they have an entire deck built around them, or just have straight up broken effects, like number 16 Shockmaster, or number 86 Heroic Champion Rongo Miniad. And level 6 monsters are even harder to work with than level 4s. Basically anything above rank 4s are not going to see play if they require more than 2 materials, especially not a popular level like level 6. Unless they release a whole bunch of really good level 6 support in the future like they did for level 9s. But if you're playing a deck that spams out a lot of level 6, like maybe in Duel Links and you're using a Hazy Flame Beast deck, then this could be an option. It's not bad, it's just hard to summon, and probably wouldn't win you the game even if you did resolve its effect because it requires so much effort to bring out and has kind of low stats for a rank 6 monster. And at number 7, we have Dark Magic Expanded. This is a quick play spell card which has 3 effects that it gains based on the number of Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl monsters on the field or in the graveyards. If you have 1, you can target a Dark Spellcaster monster on the field and give it 1000 attack until the end of the turn. If you have 2 or more, all of your spell and trap cards gain spell speed 4 protection, and also your spell and trap cards cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. And lastly, if you have 3 or more, your Dark Spellcaster monsters become unaffected by your opponent's card effects until the end of the turn. So if you have 3 or more cards, you gain all 3 of the effects, as they do stack on top of each other. And the card basically just gives you a whole bunch of protection to your spell and traps, plus your Dark Spellcaster monsters, in addition to a single 1000 attack boost. And all of that is fine and everything, it's just a little bit underpowered for the TCG. This card came out in 2016, and in 2015 we had things like Full Power Pepe, so its power level was a little bit behind the times. It is really nice protection, but it's protection for Dark Magician monsters, which doesn't really matter. In fact, this kind of protection doesn't matter very much in a majority of archetypes, if it comes from a conditional quick play spell card, especially not one revolving around a normal monster with 2500 attack. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, it's perfectly appropriate, and there's nothing Duel Links likes more than releasing a whole bunch of Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon support. So I'm sure Duel Links players have seen a lot of Dark Magic expanded play, but it's not something that really appears in competitive Dark Magician decks in the TCG, when those kinds of decks rarely see competitive play at all. It offers some decent protection, but it doesn't do enough in addition to that protection. And at number 6, we have the Winged Dragon of Ra, Immortal Phoenix. This card can only special summon itself from the graveyard if the Winged Dragon of Ra is sent from the field to the graveyard, and this card's special summon has spell speed 4 protection, where your opponent cannot respond to it in any way. The card itself is also immune to all card effects while it's on the field. It allows you to pay 1000 life points to send a monster to the graveyard, and has an effect where it sends itself to the graveyard during the end phase in order to special summon the Winged Dragon Raw Sphere mode from your hand, deck, or graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions. So if you manage to bring this card out, it only stays on the field for 1 turn. And the reason this card is on the list is because it's too cumbersome to bring out, kind of like Fairy Knight Ingunar. In order to bring this card out, you need to get it in the graveyard first, which means you have to use something like Foolish Burial or Beatrice Lady of the Eternal in order to send it directly from your deck to the graveyard, or find some way to search it out and then send it to the graveyard from your hand. If the card could special summon itself from the deck, or was at least a little bit more convenient and allowed you to use it from your hand in addition to the graveyard, that would definitely help. While it's on the field, it's actually pretty great. It has a baseline 4000 attack while being immune to card effects, and you can spam its effect to send monsters your opponent controls to the graveyard, just as long as you have life points to pay. And this effect doesn't target and doesn't destroy, so it's excellent removal. But it only stays around for 1 turn, and since it's unaffected by other card effects, you can't actually stop the effect from happening. Plus, getting the Winged Dragon of Ra on the field in the first place is not easy either, even with its new support that's made bringing it out a lot faster. So again, decent card effect, but too hard to bring out, and that generally kills the viability of most cards like this. There are tons of cards in the game that technically have good effects, but don't see play because they're too hard to use. And at number 5, we have Lucius, the Shadow Vassal. This is a level 1 monster which can special summon itself from your hand by banishing 1 level 5 or higher monster from your graveyard. And if you bring it out with this effect, you cannot special summon monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn. And also, if this card is tributed for a tribute summon, you can look at all set cards your opponent controls, and your opponent cannot activate any card effects in response to this effect. Now, let's look at its summoning condition. On surface level, this actually seems like a pretty decent card. You get to special summon a monster from your hand pretty easily in a Monarch deck, which plays nothing but high level monsters. The problem being, generally, the Vassal Monarchs are used in order to get the Monarchs on the field in the first place. So they're not going to have a readily available level 5 or higher monster in the graveyard to start off the plays. And since this is a starter card, that's kind of a big deal. If you draw this card later on the duel, you're probably going to be able to summon it, but that's not the point of this card. And if you try to use this outside of Monarch decks, it will just lock you out of your extra deck, which makes it almost completely worthless because there's lots of other cards that can special summon themselves from the hand without requiring you to remove very specific resources from your graveyard or locking you out of your extra deck in the process. And if you do tribute this card for its spell speed 4 effect, the effect isn't even good. Just being able to look at your opponent's set cards without doing anything to them isn't really worth trying to spend any kind of resources to gain that effect. Granted, you don't really have to spend resources to gain the effect, since you're just tributing the card whose main purpose is to be tribute fodder for Monarchs anyway. But there are some good Vassal Monarchs that you could use besides this one, like Eidos, the Underworld Squire, or Edia, the Heavenly Squire, the 2 Vassals that saw the most amount of play in Monarch decks, mainly because both of them were actually good starter cards, didn't require you to remove resources to use them, and instead actually generated resources or extra effects that were useful, like giving you an extra tribute summon for the turn, special summoning another Vassal from the graveyard, or special summoning a Vassal from the deck on their summon. Lucius is almost hilariously bad in comparison to the Squire Vassals, which is probably why the Squires were almost exclusively used instead of any of the actual Vassals themselves, besides maybe Landrope the Rock Vassal. And at number 4, we have Reverse Breaker. This is an equipped spell card that can only be equipped to a Utopia monster, and then in order to activate the effect of the card, you need the equipped monster to declare an attack, where you can then target one spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it, and your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards in response to this effect. So it's kind of like Night Beam, allowing you to destroy one spell or trap card with some form of spell speed 4 protection, as it doesn't prevent monsters from responding to the effect, just spell and trap cards. And while technically being able to destroy one spell or trap card is pretty good, especially every time you declare an attack on a card that can potentially gain multiple attacks, the problem with the card is the fact that it doesn't do anything immediately. It needs to be equipped to a very specific type of monster, and its effect doesn't really become good until you've used it multiple times. In order for Reverse Breaker to be better than something like an MST, you would need to have a Utopia declare at least 2 attacks, which could happen during the course of a duel if you're trying to create a gigantic Utopia full of a whole bunch of effects that don't allow it to be destroyed by anything, like the whole purpose of ZW decks. But at that point, you're better off just playing good spell or trap card removal. There's not really a reason to play this card over things like Harpy's Feather Duster, Twin Twister, or even Galaxy Cyclone, as all of those cards can gain more advantage easier without having the vulnerability of being an equipped card, and requiring you to declare attacks. Equipped cards are extra vulnerable because they're so easy to remove, as they're destroyed if the monster they're equipped to is destroyed, or if your opponent destroys it with spell or trap card removal, or if the monster on the field is removed temporarily or just flipped face down. So equipped spell cards need to be really good in order to see competitive play, or generate immediate advantage, and Reverse Breaker just isn't quite good enough, and it's just a little bit underpowered. And at number 3, we have Mila, the Temporal Magician. This is a level 4 monster which simply has the effect that when this card is normal summoned, you can look at one set card your opponent controls, and your opponent cannot activate any spell or traps in response to this effect. So kind of like Lucius the Shadow Vassal, all it does is allow you to gain information without doing anything with that information. Part of the reasons cards like a Pointer the Red Lotus is good is because it allows you to gain information on your opponent's hand and temporarily interact with it. Gaining information on your opponent's set cards is not as good as gaining information on your opponent's hand. And if effects don't do anything in addition to gain information, then there's not really a point in playing them. At least Lucius can special summon itself from the hand. Temporal Magician takes up your normal summon. If you really need a light spellcaster type monster with 1800 attack, you probably don't want to play this card even in those situations, because it doesn't really do anything. And at number 2, we have Inzektor Crossbow, Zektarrow. This is an equipped spell card which can only be equipped to an Inzektor monster, where it then gives the monster 500 attack, and the effect where the equipped monster gains spell speed 4 protection to all of their activated effects. So, if you equip this card to something like Inzektor Dragonfly, your opponent won't be able to respond to any of its activated effects. Now, the problem with Inzektor Crossbow is kind of the same problem as Reverse Breaker. It's an equipped spell card that doesn't really do anything immediately, and a 500 attack boost is hilariously low, especially for Inzektors who all have very low attack point values anyway. There's another Inzektor equipped card called Inzektor Gigamantis, which will change the original attack of the monster it's equipped to 2400. It is a monster that allows you to equip it to an Inzektor monster from your hand, and if this card is sent to the graveyard while equipped, you can special summon an Inzektor monster from your graveyard. And the Inzektor Gigamantis is really good in Inzektor decks, because Inzektors actually love equipped spell cards, or monsters that can equip themselves to them, and their whole archetype basically revolves around these effects. But they highly value cards that do something else besides just being an equipped card. Especially cards which can remove themselves from being an equipped card, like Inzektor Hornet or Inzektor Ladybug, or gain advantage after being an equipped card, like Inzektor Gigamantis or Inzektor Sword Zektalibur. Inzektor Crossbow does none of these things. It just provides a minor attack boost and spell speed 4 protection, which doesn't really help their plays along. Even if you want to use the card for its intended effect of maybe equipping it to an Inzektor Dragonfly so your opponent can't negate its effects, your opponent can just negate the effects of the equipped spell card, or just destroy it with any form of spell speed 2 disruption, as destroying the equipped monster or this card will put a stop to that pretty fast, since it has the vulnerabilities of equipped spell cards. And at number 1, we have Odin's Eye. This is a continuous trap card which has an effect that can only be used during a player's standby phase, where you can target one of your Aesir monsters in order to negate its effects until the end of the turn. And if you do this, you get to look at all cards in your opponent's hand and set on their side of the field, with spell speed 4 protection. So your opponent can't activate cards and effects in response to this activated effect. So, first off, the effect is not good. Only gaining knowledge in your opponent's hand without being able to interact with it isn't that big of a deal, even if it is technically better to gain information on your opponent's hand than cards on their side of the field. So if this effect was attached to Lucius the Shadow Vassal, that would make the card a little bit better, but not good enough to see play. However, the bigger problem with this card, besides the fact that the effect is not very good, is that there are only 3 Aesir monsters in the game, and all 3 of them are hard to bring out level 10 synchro monsters, who either have effects that activate during your opponent's turn, or have some kind of floating effect that they don't want to be turned off. So the conditions to activate Odin's Eye are actually kind of a detriment to those 3 monsters, and too hard to activate, while also not really being a good effect for all the effort you have to go through in order to use it. But at least it's spell speed 4, which means almost nothing, because you can only use this card during the standby phase anyway, and your opponent would probably be better off allowing you to resolve the effect, because it leaves them in a better game state, which is why this card takes the number 1 spot on this list. Alright, and that's the video. What I need from you people are suggestions. I need some good ideas for my worst of series. Give me some good ideas down in the comments so I can turn them into videos. Also, like the video, it helps out more than subscribing.